The winter night was a predator, silent and bone-chilling, as it settled over the rusted frame of the sedan. Inside, the air was so thin and frigid that every breath Jenny Cantwell drew felt like swallowing needles. She leaned over the back seat, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. There, wrapped in a cocoon of mismatched sweaters and a threadbare fleece blanket, lay 5-year-old Debbie. In the pale glow of a distant street lamp, Jenny watched the white mist of her daughter's breath rise in shallow, jagged puffs. Jenny reached out, her fingers trembling as she brushed them against Debbie's forehead. The heat was terrifying, a dry, radiating burn that seemed to mock the frost creeping across the windshield. "Mama?" Debbie murmured, her voice a ghostly rasp that broke the suffocating silence of the car. "Is it time to go to the castle yet?" "Almost, baby," Jenny whispered, blinking back tears that felt like they might freeze to her cheeks. She looked down at her lap, where her last $12 lay crumpled, 4 singles and a handful of silver. It was the price of a gallon of gas or a bottle of fever reducer, but not both. It was the math of despair. She looked through the glass, her eyes drawn to the towering glass monolith of the Grand Heights Hotel across the plaza. The Starlight Gala was in full swing, and from this distance, it looked like a literal heaven fallen to earth. Blinding golden light spilled from the arched windows, casting long amber shadows across the snow. Men in tailored tuxedos and women draped in shimmering silk laughed behind the glass, oblivious to the woman in the shadows who was watching her world crumble. At the center of that golden world was Oliver Stark. Even from the street, his presence was unmistakable, a silhouette of power and absolute certainty. Jenny looked back at Debbie's flushed face and then at the gala. The contrast was a physical blow. The opulence over there felt like a sin while her daughter suffered over here. For months, Jenny's pride had been her only armor, the one thing she refused to lose. But as Debbie's breath hitched in a fit of weak coughing, Jenny realized that pride was a shroud she was wrapping around her child. Shaking with a mix of terror and a new, fierce resolve, Jenny shoved the $12 into her pocket and stepped out into the biting wind, moving toward the gold. Jenny pushed through the heavy revolving doors, a gust of winter air following her like a ghost into the marble foyer of the hotel. The warmth of the lobby hit her face with a suddenness that made her dizzy, but she didn't stop. She bypassed the registration desk, her wet boots squeaking against the polished stone, and moved toward the grand ballroom. The security guard stepped into her path, his hand raised, but Jenny didn't break her stride. "I'm not here for the food," she said, her voice trembling but loud enough to turn heads. "I'm here for the man who says he builds futures. I'm here for Oliver Stark." She burst into the ballroom just as Oliver was stepping down from the podium. The room fell into a suffocating silence. A sea of tuxedos and silk gowns parted, eyes widening at the sight of the soaked black woman in the fraying coat. Oliver froze, his sharp, crystalline blue eyes narrowing as they landed on her. He looked every bit the Iron Architect, unreachable, flawless, and cold. "Mr. Stark," Jenny gasped, her lungs burning from the cold she'd just left. "My daughter is in a car outside. She's 5. She has a fever, and I have $12. You talk about urban renewal and building foundations. Well, my foundation is gone. I don't want your money. I want a job. I want a roof that doesn't leak. Please, look at me." The room held its breath, expecting the billionaire to signal for her removal. Instead, a flicker of something raw and unrecognizable crossed Oliver's face. He didn't look at the security guards rushing toward her. He looked at the salt stain on her boots and the desperate, mother-lion fire in her eyes. "Stand down," Oliver commanded, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. He walked toward her, his movements fluid and purposeful. When he reached her, the scent of expensive sandalwood and rain enveloped her. Without a word, he reached up and unbuttoned his charcoal wool designer coat. In a movement so tender it sent a shockwave through the crowd, he draped the heavy, warm garment over Jenny's shivering shoulders. The silk lining felt like a caress against her damp skin. "Take me to her," Oliver whispered, his hand settling firmly, protectively, on the small of her back. "Show me your daughter, Jenny." The transition from the biting, icy wind of the street to the climate-controlled silence of Oliver's penthouse was almost more than Jenny's senses could bear. The elevator ride had been a blur of chrome and soft lighting, with Oliver's heavy wool coat still draped over her shoulders, smelling of expensive cedar and something uniquely him. He carried Debbie with a careful, rigid precision, as if the sleeping girl were a piece of fine crystal he was terrified of shattering. When the doors opened directly into a sprawling living space of floor-to-ceiling glass and soft cream rugs, Jenny felt a pang of shame for her dripping boots, but Oliver didn't even glance down. He led them straight to a guest suite that felt larger than their entire car. "The fever needs to come down gently," Oliver said, his voice losing its corporate edge and taking on a low, gravelly timbre. He didn't call a maid or a nurse. Instead, he moved into the adjoining marble bathroom and began running a basin of lukewarm water. Jenny stood in the doorway, clutching the lapels of his coat, watching as the iron architect knelt on the hard tile floor. He rolled up the sleeves of his white dress shirt, revealing forearms corded with muscle and a light dusting of dark hair. With a tenderness that made Jenny's breath hitch, Oliver dipped a soft cloth into the water and began to dab Debbie's heated face. The girl didn't wake, but she sighed, her small body finally uncurling from the defensive ball she had occupied for days. "You're good with her," Jenny whispered, her voice cracking. Oliver didn't look up, but his hand paused for a fraction of a second on Debbie's brow. "I spent a lot of time taking care of the younger kids in the group home," he admitted, his eyes fixed on the child. "You learn how to be quiet, so you don't wake the ones who finally found a moment of peace." In that moment, the billionaire facade vanished. Under the soft amber lights of the bathroom, Jenny saw the boy he had been, the one who knew what it felt like to be cold and forgotten. As he squeezed the excess water from the cloth, his gaze finally met Jenny's. It wasn't a look of charity, but of deep, aching recognition. For the first time in a year, the weight on Jenny's chest began to lift, replaced by a terrifying, beautiful warmth. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Oliver's home office, casting long, sharp shadows over a desk made of reclaimed obsidian. Jenny sat across from him, dressed in a simple but elegant wrap dress he had arranged to be delivered to her guest suite. Though she had slept in a bed of Egyptian cotton, her posture remained as guarded and upright, as if she were still braced against the steering wheel of her car. Oliver pushed a thick manila folder across the desk. "My board wants me to increase my philanthropic footprint for the upcoming merger," he began, his voice regaining its professional steel, yet his eyes remained fixed on her with a curious intensity. "I have the capital, but I lack perspective. I've read your resume, Jenny. You weren't just a call center worker. You were a floor supervisor with a degree in sociology before the layoffs hit. You know the streets I'm trying to reach better than any consultant I can buy." Jenny didn't reach for the folder immediately. Instead, she leaned forward, her dark eyes locking onto his without a hint of the deference usually shown to a man of his stature. "You want to build affordable housing in the East District," she said, her voice steady and clear. "But your proposal lists a grocery store 3 miles away from the transit hub. You're building a beautiful cage, Mr. Stark, not a community. People don't just need roofs, they need access." Oliver leaned back, a slow, genuine smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. It was the first time in years someone had dared to call his logic flawed to his face. He found himself less interested in the data and more captivated by the fire in her spirit, the way she refused to let his billions dim her own light. "The position is Director of Urban Outreach," Oliver said, his tone softening as he watched her. "It comes with a salary that ensures Debbie never has to sleep in a car again, and a seat at every board meeting. I don't want a yes woman, Jenny. I want someone who remembers the cold." Jenny looked at the folder, then back at the man who had bathed her daughter's fever away. The professional bridge between them was forming, but beneath it, an undeniable current of attraction pulled at her. She reached out and took the pen. "Then you found her." The office was a cathedral of glass and shadow, the only light coming from the dual monitors on Jenny's desk, and the amber city lights shimmering 40 floors below. It was nearly midnight, and the silence of the empty Stark Industries headquarters felt intimate, rather than lonely. Jenny was leaning over a digital map of the city's north end, her brow furrowed in concentration, when the heavy scent of sandalwood signaled Oliver's approach. He didn't stay in his corner office. Instead, he pulled a chair up beside her, his tie loosened and the top button of his shirt undone, a rare look of vulnerability for the man who lived in armor. "You're still here," he murmured, his voice low and vibrating in the quiet room. "I told you the project could wait until Monday." "I can't rest while the data is incomplete, Oliver," Jenny replied, not looking up, though her pulse quickened at his proximity. "I know what it's like to wait for a promise that never comes. These families need to see the blueprints, not just hear the words." Oliver watched her, his gaze lingering on the determined line of her jaw. "I lived in a place like the one you're trying to replace," he said suddenly. The admission hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. Jenny turned to him, her eyes searching his. Oliver stared at the glowing screen, his voice distant. 7 houses in 10 years. I used to carry my entire life in a black trash bag. People think I built this empire out of greed, but I built it so I'd never have to move again. So no one could ever tell me I didn't belong." The iron architect was gone. In his place was the boy who had been cold and forgotten. Moved by a sudden fierce wave of affection, Jenny reached out, her hand resting over his on the desk. His skin was warm, and his fingers instinctively twined with hers. The air between them thickened, charged with a magnetic tension that had been building since the night of the gala. Oliver leaned in, his gaze dropping to her lips, and for a moment, the world narrowed down to the soft hum of the computers and the frantic beat of 2 hearts. Their breath mingled, a whisper away from a kiss that would change everything, before the sudden chime of Jenny's phone, a reminder of Debbie waiting at home, broke the spell. They pulled back, flushed and breathless, the embers of an undeniable fire finally catching light. The ballroom of the Starlight Gala was just as golden as it had been weeks ago, but tonight, Jenny Cantwell didn't have to fight her way past the glass doors. She entered on the arm of Oliver Stark, her presence commanding a different kind of silence. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk that complemented the rich tone of her skin, her dark hair swept up in an elegant coil that revealed the poise she had always possessed, even in the darkest nights in the sedan. Beside her, Oliver moved with a proprietary grace, his hand never leaving the small of her back, as if anchoring her to this new world. The whispers began almost immediately. In a corner of the room, Patricia Vanderbilt, a woman whose lineage was as cold as her diamonds, didn't bother to lower her voice. "It's fascinating, isn't it?" Patricia remarked to a small circle of socialites, her eyes tracking Jenny with a sharp, clinical disdain. "Oliver's new project. I suppose a bit of charity work is trendy this season, but one wonders if he's forgotten that you can dress up a stray, but you can't change its pedigree. Is she here to serve the appetizers, or to eat them?" The air around them seemed to drop 20 degrees. Jenny felt the familiar sting of shame begin to rise, the phantom weight of her old, wet coat threatening to return. But before she could even stiffen her shoulders, she felt Oliver's hand tighten protectively. He didn't lead her away. He led her directly into the center of the circle. "Patricia," Oliver said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that cut through the music. The room went still. He looked down at Patricia with a look of bored indifference that was more devastating than a shout. "I've always admired your ability to speak so much while saying so little. However, let me clarify something for the room. Jenny Cantwell is not a project. She is the director of urban outreach at Stark Industries, a woman of more substance than this entire circle combined. And tonight, she is my guest." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room with a chilling finality. "Anyone who treats her with anything less than the respect her position and her character demand will find their business with me concluded by sunrise." He turned back to Jenny, his expression softening into something so tender it was almost a physical caress. "Shall we dance, Jenny?" In that moment, he hadn't just defended her, he had marked her as his equal, and the heat of his gaze told her that in his eyes, she was the only one in the room who truly belonged. The honeymoon phase of Jenny's new life was shattered by a manila envelope that landed on Oliver's desk with the weight of a guillotine. Marcus Thorne, a rival whose corporate strategy was built on the wreckage of others, sat across from Oliver with a predatory smirk. Inside the envelope were grainy surveillance photos of a battered sedan, a police report from a night Jenny had been moved along from a public park, and a desperate, half-smudged application for a homeless shelter. "The public is so fickle, Oliver," Marcus drawled, leaning back in the obsidian chair. "They love a rags-to-riches story until they see the rags up close. Think of the shareholders. If word gets out that the vice president of your flagship initiative was a vagrant living in her car just months ago, the Stark Industries stock will plummet. People will call it a lapse in judgment, or worse, an obsession." Oliver didn't blink, though the muscles in his jaw tightened until they were like cords of iron. He looked at the photo of Jenny, exhausted and pale, clutching a shivering Debbie in the front seat of that car. It didn't fill him with shame. It filled him with a protective rage that burned white-hot. "I have a counter-proposal," Marcus continued, sliding a merger agreement across the table, one that essentially stripped Oliver of his voting rights in the North End project. "Sign this, and these records disappear. Your Cinderella keeps her glass slippers, and you keep your reputation." Marcus didn't realize he had miscalculated the man across from him. He saw a billionaire with everything to lose. He didn't see the boy who had once carried his life in a trash bag. Oliver looked at the records, then up at Marcus with a terrifying, calm clarity. He realized that this wasn't just an attack on his company. It was an attempt to make Jenny's survival something to be ashamed of. "You think her struggle is a weakness," Oliver said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, vibrating low. "You think the fact that she survived a system designed to break her makes her less than the people in this room. You're wrong, Marcus. It makes her the only person in this building I can actually trust." Oliver picked up the phone, not to call his lawyers, but to call the head of his PR department. He wasn't going to hide. He was going to turn Marcus's weapon into a monument. The conference room of the Stark Plaza was a sea of flashing bulbs and high-tension energy, with every major news outlet in the city crowded against the velvet ropes. On the mahogany stage, the merger documents, the very papers Marcus Thorne had intended to use as a leash, lay waiting. Marcus stood to the side, a smug, expectant glint in his eyes, waiting for Oliver to announce the personnel changes that would signify Jenny's quiet dismissal. Instead, Oliver took the podium and gestured for Jenny to join him. She stepped forward, her heart thundering against her ribs, her hand instinctively seeking the comfort of the emerald silk she wore. Oliver didn't look at the cameras. He didn't look at the hostile board members or the smirking rival. He looked only at Jenny. For weeks, I've heard whispers that my association with Jenny Cantwell is a liability. Oliver began, his voice amplified and steady, carrying a weight that silenced the room. There are those who believe that a person's value is dictated by the roof over their head or the balance in their bank account. They think that her past, her struggle for survival, is something to be hidden. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, but he didn't open it immediately. He took Jenny's hand, his fingers warm and certain. I spent my life building skyscrapers, obsessed with reaching higher and higher, thinking that the height of my success would protect me from the world. But Jenny taught me that a building is only as strong as what lies beneath the surface. She taught me how to build a foundation. She showed me that true strength isn't found in what you own, but in who you refuse to leave behind. The room erupted in a flurry of shudders as Oliver dropped to one knee. The Iron Architect was gone, replaced by a man offering his heart in front of the world. Jenny, you are the foundation of my life. I don't want to sign a merger today. I want to start a family. Will you marry me? The silence that followed was electric, broken only by Jenny's soft, tearful, yes. As Oliver slid the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a fierce, protective kiss, the cameras captured a moment that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with a love that had finally found its home. The morning of the wedding was not filled with the sterile perfection of a corporate merger, but with the vibrant, chaotic warmth of a family finally finding its center. The garden of the Stark estate was a sea of white lilies and soft laughter, yet the most beautiful sight was Jenny standing beneath the floral arch. She wore a gown of ivory lace that seemed to glow against her skin, her eyes reflecting a peace that had been absent for too many years. Beside her, Oliver stood tall, his usual mask of billionaire indifference, completely shattered by a smile of pure, unadulterated joy. As the vows were exchanged and the ring settled onto fingers, Oliver knelt once more, not for the press and not for the cameras, but for the little girl standing between them in a dress of ruffled tulle. From his pocket he pulled a small, rose-gold locket. "Debbie," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "A family isn't just about the names we share. It's about the promise that you will never have to be cold or hungry again." He opened the locket to reveal 3 tiny photos, Jenny in her car, Oliver at his desk, and the 3 of them laughing in the penthouse. "Now, we are one." The celebration lasted until the stars began to mirror the twinkle of the champagne flutes, but the true conclusion of their journey took place at the edge of the estate's long driveway. There, parked under the amber glow of the gate lamps, sat the battered gray sedan. It looked small and fragile next to the luxury vehicles of the guests, its rusted fenders, a stark reminder of the nights when the white mist was their only company. As the tow truck arrived to hoist the car onto its bed, Oliver wrapped his arm around Jenny's waist, pulling her and Debbie close. The vehicle wasn't headed for a scrapyard. It was bound for the city's Museum of Social History, destined to become an exhibit for the foundation Jenny now led. They stood together in the quiet night, watching as the physical ghost of their struggle was pulled away. The car was gone, but the strength it had forged in them remained. Jenny leaned her head against Oliver's shoulder, finally letting go of the last shred of fear. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were a legacy built on the ruins of a miracle. If you were in Oliver's shoes and someone interrupted your most important night to ask for a chance, would you have the heart to look past their appearance and see their potential? What would you do if you saw someone struggling like Jenny? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of hope and transformation. Thank you so much for watching till the end. It truly means a lot to me. If this video touched your heart or resonated with you in any way, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to Moments of Romance. Your support helps us reach more souls on this journey. Until next time, take care of your heart.